one up and down in the morning and one up and down in the afternoon, which basically is what this is all about. So now you could go down, you could go from Carson to Virginia in the morning and come back in the afternoon and not spend the night in Virginia City. Yes, sir?
The passenger trains were actually mixed.
They were a freight train with a caboose on the, with a combine on the end. And you could wear whatever you wanted. The finely dressed ladies and the miners in their dirty boots would be on the same car. And also some of the Indians. Life was different.
And the Indians rode on the platform. Yes, it is.
What was interesting is that when they got to the second schedule, the Virginia and the Carson overnighted in the same place, but in that first schedule, they overnighted, the crews overnighted in different locations every other night, which must have been lovely for the married train crew people. But they finally, when they got to this newer schedule, the Virginia and Carson, the big efforts, their train crews would overnight at the same location. But the story and number one and number two, which were hauling 3 freight trains, would overnight, again, their crews would overnight at different locations. Couldn't be avoided. Okay, in May, they again expanded the schedule. We're getting lots of business now, lots of trains running. You had the passenger trains up and down, leaving at 8 a.m. and coming back at 4. You had freight trains at 6 in the morning. At 8, you had the passenger train, and then 10, 12, 2, and 6, more freight trains. 14 trains, plus extras and second sections, all being done with 5 locomotives and no timetable. No railroad crew timetable. So we had some problems. April 19th, at the Vivian Cut that I showed you, the Virginia and the Carson collided. The story on May 5th was derailed by a landslide, and it was going to be out of service for 1 or 2 weeks. So all they had for about a week was the Lion and the Armsby to haul all the trains. And we don't have any records of what they did with that situation, but they obviously could not run all those trains. May 10th, the Carson came back to service, and on May 13th, the Armsby and the Carson collided. So the Armsby was out of service, leaving the Lion and the Carson as the only locomotives that had to run the trains. But by May 19th, the Comstock finally arrived and began to alleviate this problem. Now we get to why there became a timetable. Here was the Vivian Cut situation. The Virginia was going down, up with 5 cordwood cars and 1 lumber car. The Carson was hauling the largest train to date, 6 loaded ore dumps, 8 empty ore dumps, and 12 empty flat cars. After the collision, the Lion came up and took the wood cars back to Mount House. The Armsby was up in Virginia, and it came down and got the down train cars, and they just put them wherever they could. The empty ore dumps, obviously, going downhill implies that tailings were being sent to Virginia City because this location at Vivian Cut was not one where there would be any loads coming back in ore cars except tailings. Okay, and here's where we had the requirement for a timetable. There was, because one person got killed, there was a coroner's jury. The jury couldn't figure out who was at fault because there were no written instructions from the dispatcher to any of the conductors, at least none that were turned into the coroner's jury. And the jury's conclusion was that the railroad needed to stop verbal communications and start issuing written communications between the dispatcher and the conductor. So on June 24th, they started operations controlled by the dispatcher in Carson and requiring every train crew to respond. And by July 10th, they actually put a timetable in place. And we'll talk about some of these. What time is it, by the way? Where am I?
10 o'clock.
Okay, I'll hurry. The telegraph system was very simple. There were stations at Carson, Mount House, which had the address ND, Silver Switch SW, and Gold Hill A. The dispatcher at Carson would send train orders addressed to the engineer and conductor, who had to repeat the order back by telegraph before they could leave. So you would have outgoing telegraph number 13, that's what Hunter would use as his outgoing letter to Harold Shreves and Hempel at Mount House. His order was to run through to Silver, to meet the Ormsby at Silver, and then run through. 12 means that was his copy of what the crew responded with. They okayed the exchange of information at 9:10 a.m. By Shreves and Campbell's response. What's interesting is that all of the station agents were supposed to report by telegraph when trains arrived and when trains departed, but that never got written down. This was the dispatcher's cover my ass record. I sent the record and they sent it back. I mean, I sent the order and they sent it back. But when these trains got anywhere, it wasn't his problem. So we don't have anything written down in the telegraph books about when any of these trains arrived or departed from their locations. Okay, first day of telegraph operations. There were 4 scheduled trains, 4 of which were accommodation trains. 2 extras going up as second sections as far as the first stop, which was oftentimes Silver Switch. They would then continue up to Virginia as an extra on the second section of the following train. There were 2 down trains running as second sections as far as Silver Switch, and then going down as second sections. Traffic was managed by the dispatcher to keep the passenger trains on schedule if possible, and off-schedule trains went into the hole at Morgan, Brunswick, Mount House, and Silver Switch to meet trains that either were late or early. Carson and Comstock now were running on the same schedule in opposite directions. Astoria and the Virginia were running as pairs, and the Ormsby ran 4 extras. The dispatcher sent 35 messages out, got 35 back. So it took 70 messages, plus the station agent's messages, to run these trains one day. Busy man. You wonder how he did it without telegraph. Obviously not too well. The rolling stock did increase. Here's what we had to start with. By very late in 1870, they had gotten 3 more locomotives. I think they figured out that 5 was not going to run the increasing number of trains. They added 5 more ore dumps. They now had 45, and 5 flat cars for a total of 50. By July, they'd actually gotten the ore dumps up to 40 from 25, and the flat cars from somewhere around 25 up to 45. So they were realizing that they had not ordered enough rolling stock to handle the traffic. The last day of operations by telegraph, they had 6 trains up and 6 trains down. 1 up extra, which ran to Silver Switch as the first section of the first train, and then came up as an extra. Total of 13 trains, 25 telegraph from the dispatcher, 25 replies, 50 plus messages for the day. And this was a Sunday with the last 2 trains canceled. Again, very busy. So the next day was the first day of the timetable. Timetable number 1. Schedule began at 6 a.m. Eastbound trains were odd numbered. The eastbound trains were odd numbered. Westbound trains were even numbered. All train pairs departed at the same time, and they all held at Mount House until they could be passed. No train could leave Gold Hill or Carson on the hour until the opposite direction train got there. You'll see that they had to wait, depending on whether they were eastbound or westbound, they had to wait either 15 minutes or 5 minutes and then proceed basically at their own risk. No train could depart ahead of schedule. This was the rules of the road. Eastbound trains basically had the right of way. Westbound trains had to wait 15 minutes for a scheduled eastbound train to arrive, and if it didn't get there, then the westbound train could leave. And there was this statement that an additional 5 minutes should be allowed for safety. I have no idea what the conductor was supposed to make of that. Was they supposed to wait 15 minutes or 20 minutes? But obviously, a late train knew that if they didn't get where they were supposed to be within 15 minutes of their schedule, somebody was gonna come down the hill, running on schedule. And they were now burdened to duck into whatever siding they could to be safe. All trains will run according to schedule unless they got special orders from a competent authority. Mr. Yerrington was a competent authority, by the way. Standard instructions, they carried a red flag for the first section. The second section had the same train rights as the first section. They had, if the second section was later than the first section, then they became burdened. Construction training conductors must inform the dispatcher today where they will work tomorrow. Night trains have to carry a red flag, a red light on the rear car. Okay, first day of scheduled operations, there were 12 scheduled trains. There were only 4 telegrams out. So these guys had actually been practicing under telegraph how to run under the timetable those last few days. First message was to all operators, you will please report the arrival and departure of trains promptly. Unfortunately, he didn't write those down. All concerned, trains 13 and 14 of this day are canceled. If you add the reports from Mount House and Silver Switch, as far as arrivals and departures are concerned, you get 4 more messages for each train, and Gold Hill would just report 1 message for each train. You have got here, you have left. So it became a lot easier on the dispatcher. The burden is now on the conductor to run the train, run the railroad, not the dispatcher. I'm sorry, not the dispatcher. Here's the next day. Because 13 and 14 were canceled yesterday, he had to tell Kendall and McCormick they were going to run 13 and 14 today. Here's the instruction to Engine Line, which is the gravel train, working tomorrow between Carson and Brunswick, keeping out of the way of all scheduled regular trains. So the conclusion is that the extra trains were burdened to watch for the ballast trains, because if you had an extra train that wasn't on the schedule, the ballast train didn't know you were coming. So you had to know where that ballast train was and keep watch for it and avoid a collision. I've got a list here of kind of interesting special orders. July 13th, run to Virginia, keeping out of the way of regular trains. Look out for cars on the main track at Yellow Jacket. So on this date, they were still loading ore cars on the main track at Gold Hill. July 15th, run to Scales to meet and pass train 9, so we know by July 19th there was a passing sighting at Scales. July 16th, don't leave Silver without orders. Report when ready to leave. Obviously that train went down to Silver and came back, and when it got back and was ready to leave, a Silver Switch, it had to report. It also said an extra train will leave Virginia this PM, running to Silver and return. So you see that there were wood loads trains that came from Carson to Silver, went down with the wood loads, came back to Silver, and went back to Carson. People keep asking how Silver City was served, and the answer is any way possible. Here's the telegram that makes Mr. Holmes responsible for dispatching trains between Virginia and Gold Hill. You will be subject to his orders only between these points. So the dispatcher in Carson was turning over the trackage between Gold Hill and Virginia to Mr. Holmes. August 11th, run very slow and careful over the Gold Hill trestle. No reasons, just do it. August 22, turn your train at Silver. No Tabel here in Carson. The next day, turn your trains at Silver going west until further notice. We do not know what happened to this Carson turntable, but it wasn't there. And so between Silver and Gold Hill, those trains were running backwards. I'm sorry, between Carson and Silver, the trains were running backwards, simply because they couldn't turn in Carson. Accident. Train 4, run to Silver regardless of train 1. You will find Indian Virginia off the track, just west of American Flat Tunnel. Leave your train at Scale go down and pull Virginia's train back to Scales, then go down and pull the engine on and take her to Silver. So you can see how they dealt with odd things. And then, of course, they had to cancel Train 5 because Virginia was supposed to haul it. The remainder of all the trains that day were dispatched by telegraph. They basically shut down the timetable because they didn't know what resources they were going to have and when those trains could go. Another interesting one, on October 2nd, telegram to J.W. Bowker. Run to Carson as the second section of Train 6. Train 6, carry flag to Carson for engine Nevada. This was the first test run of the Nevada from Virginia City where it was put into operation. Ran empty, light, down to Carson, came back hauling one passenger car. So says the Gold Hill Daily News. And October 11th, my birthday. Engine story, run to Carson as the second section of Train 11, take 2 cars of nut pine from the Brunswick Mill. So they were loading flat cars with nut pine at Brunswick. So there must have been either a way to do that from the main line, or they must have had a spur there by then. October 18th, run to Carson in advance of time, not exceeding 15 miles an hour. Don't leave any flat at the Mexican, but leave 2 at Brunswick. So you can see that they are now using those wood yards that were at the various mills on the Carson River. October 20th, run the Carson in advance of time, not exceeding 15 miles an hour. Approach Carson Yard very cautiously. We don't know why. Leave 5 fat cars at the Mexican. Again, loading wood at the Mexican mill. October 26th, run the Mountain House regardless of Train 9. Take your engine and assist them to the Santiago water tank. Train 9 ran out of water and didn't think it was going to make the next station, the next water tank. October 28th, meet and pass Train 9 at Merrimack. Leave all your flats at Mexican and flats on the schoolhouse track. Stephen, what the hell was the schoolhouse track? October 30th, run to Carson, keeping out of the way of all regular trains that bring all of the dumps and flats out of Carson City. So here was a down train that stopped at Silver Switch, left its train there, went down to Silver City, brought all the empty cars out, both wood cars and dump cars, and took them to Carson. November 4th, run to Mount House and get wood. Return to Silver and take the loaded and empty cars there and run to Gold Hill. So here was a train that ran out of wood and didn't think it had enough fuel to make it to its destination. So, I've got about 200 pages of those that make really interesting reading because you don't get any of the facts, but you know what they did. You don't know why they did it, but you begin to understand what spurs were there, what was happening at those spurs, etc. Gravity as a friend, well, they didn't need a Virginia City switcher because they could switch all those yards, all those spur tracks by gravity. Of course, they killed people occasionally doing that. They typically dropped loaded wood cars from the Gold Hill yards to the mine below them by gravity. They dropped empty ore cars occasionally from down to Lower Gold Hill branch to the segregated Belcher and to the Belcher and the Crown Point until they built that passing siding on the lower Gold Hill switch. So, basically they couldn't have run this railroad without gravity, without flying switches and just plain gravity operation with brakemen on each of the cars. People, young kids, called hooligans by the newspaper, especially in Gold Hill, like to release the brakes and see where the cars would go. And they would go downhill. Sometimes the switch would be thrown so that the car wouldn't go down the main line, it would go